Hello, and welcome to None of the Above. My name is Steve Nemerovski, and I'm your host. For our regular visitors, we're going to start a new format today. We've been doing an hour-long format for the last 4 years, but we're going to go to a half-hour format, and I think it's going to have some advantages. First of all, it'll be a lot more timely. With the hour format, oftentimes with recording segments, etc., it might take us 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get a show up. This way, we'll be able to get our shows up and running a lot quicker. For those of you that are used to spending an hour in front of the TV watching None of the Above, we're still going to fill up the full hour for you, but we're going to do it in 2 half-hour segments. So if you've been enjoying a full hour of None of the Above, you should still be enjoying a full hour. But we'll also have the advantage of mixing and matching shows, so we can run a show 1 week, leapfrog a couple weeks, and mix things up, so you don't have to worry about catching it 1 week or 2 weeks, and then you don't see it again. This way, we'll do some mixing and matching. As you know, the purpose of None of the Above is to talk about why this political system is dysfunctional and polarized, and we always want to talk about solutions. Some of my favorite topics that we've carried forward over the last few years, and we're going to bring them all together today, is talking about the millennials and how they fit into this big picture. And as you know, one of my favorite issues is I try to push to have third-party candidates. We're not going to exactly talk third-party candidates today, but we're going to talk about how to bring new and exciting candidates into the political spectrum and maybe shake things up by doing it that way. Our guest today is David Burstein. He's the founder of a terrific organization called Run for America. He's not only the founder, but he's the CEO. He's been running this for a while. We're going to talk about Run for America. And then they have an adjunct organization, Pathways for America. And we're going to talk about both of those today. So without further ado, David, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Stephen.
So no grass grows under your feet. I've been chasing you for a while to get you on the show.
Well, I'm very happy to be able to be here.
So I was reading up on you. Is there such a thing as a child prodigy of politics? Are you a child prodigy of politics?
Well, you know, I got interested in politics at a pretty early age, and it really, was mostly just from a lot of being exposed to it, frankly, growing up. And I had a kind of moment at the end of the 2004 election. I was sitting on my couch on election night 2004, and I was frustrated with the fact when I learned that more young people hadn't voted. I myself at the time wasn't eligible to vote, but I thought about what could I possibly do to actually do something about this, and I had the idea of going out and making a documentary film about the importance of getting young people to vote, and I pretty much cold called the entire United States Congress and asked them to be in my movie. And put together a film that we took out on the road in 2008. Ended up registering 25,000 new voters across the country, and it became a big success. And that was really my first exposure. And the 2004, 2008 sort of moment in our politics. Boy, does it seem like a long time ago in a very, very different environment. But it was really kind of what got me initially interested in thinking about a lot of these questions and really seeing the key role that my generation, a new generation of leaders which we're now seeing, I think, manifest in a lot of different ways. But one of the things I saw at that moment was the fact that this was going to be a very consequential generation to the future of American politics.
Well, I think that's admirable. I mean, when I was 16, however you were at the time, I was worried about getting my driver's license, trying to figure out how I could sneak a beer once in a while, and who knows what else, worrying about what my baseball team was doing. And you're thinking ahead to how to save America. That's pretty impressive. I like that.
Well, I think it's part of the trend of what we're actually seeing from people in this generation. I don't think that I'm necessarily an anomaly in the landscape of a whole generation of young people who are really committed to taking these kind of actions very early and being part of making the country and making democracy better.
So we're going to get to Run for America, but as you mentioned, you produced a movie. What's it, 18 in 08.
Yeah.
So tell us about your movie.
Look, it was at the time, to me, it seemed the naive 16-year-old in me at the time I had the idea to make this movie was, maybe if we could go out and show people, young people, how important it was to vote, maybe more of them would vote. And I didn't know that there were lots of people who were trying to do this and that, the work had been going on for some time. But the more I learned, it also became clear to me that it was not just important to get people out to vote, but to really tell the story of what was happening. And so I set out to really document what was happening inside the generation. I interviewed everybody from Chuck Hagel to Barbara Boxer, and everybody from John Kerry to John Lewis. I mean, we took this film out. I interviewed Jeb Bush. I interviewed Richard Dreyfuss. It was a really interesting experience because we really got a broad cross-section of people from across the political spectrum to really speak to how important it is to getting young people involved, how critical it is to having increased voter participation. And I'm sad to report that while we did increase the voter turnout among young people, we were happy to play an important role in that in 2008. I don't think that our voter turnout numbers are where we need them to be. We still only have about 50% of the country that actually turns out in elections. And one of the things that I started to realize in the process of making this film, and really in the process of taking the film across the country, because we screened the film over 1,000 times in the lead up to the 2008 election on college campuses and communities. We franchised it out, and people were screening it all across the country. And I traveled myself to about 35 states between September and election day. I got to meet a lot of people and talk to them about the film and talk to them about what they were feeling. And one of the things that became very clear to me is that people are very frustrated with the fact that they don't feel like there are leaders and people worth, frankly, turning out for and voting for who are running for office. And I think that quickly, to me, became one of the most important questions to tackle in our democracy, which is why don't we have people who everyone wants to turn out and show up and vote for? People always used to say at that time, it's off the air, although coming back now, why do more people vote for American Idol than vote for president? And there's actually a very simple reason to that, which is that the characters on American Idol, frankly, to a lot of people, seem more compelling than the kind of people who run for office and show up as candidates for president. Certainly, to a lot of people, they might find that point resonant about this last election, where we had two people running for president who are both under FBI investigation while running for president. So it's a pretty simple principle, and I think one that is becoming clearer and clearer now the further we get into this process.
So I've spent a lot of my life in politics, and I don't know if you know, it's my day job back in Illinois. I'm actually a lobbyist, and I deal with these people one-on-one. I disagree to a certain extent. I think there are some talented people, but I think their talent is suppressed by the fact that they're members of parties. So they have to subject themselves to the whims of the party, and the individuality doesn't come out. So I don't know if I think there's as much of a lack of talent as much a lack of expression of talent.
I think both of those things can be true at the same time. I mean, I think there was a series of things going on. One of them is I don't think we have the best people who are running for office. It's not to say that there aren't good people who are in the system, but in terms of where our most talented people go, at the founding of America, all of our best and brightest people, all of our most talented people get involved in politics. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton. These were not people who were primarily politicians. They were inventors. They were business people. George Washington, adjusted for inflation, might actually be the wealthiest person in the country today, if you multiply that out over time. So if you look at all of that, this is a difference from where we are today, where it could be easily argued that the best and brightest do not put entering politics at the top of their list. That's different from saying we don't have any good people in government, which I do not think is true. I think there are lots of smart, talented people in government. There are also smart, talented people in government who are, as you point out, not able to express their full potential because of any number of things, because of their own sort of fears or their own desires to get reelected, or the way that they exist inside the party system. But all of that is having the result of a system where the voters are not enthusiastic about the people that are running for office. Because I think the third part of this process and problem is that you also have a greater divergence than at any point perhaps in our history between the skills that it takes to actually run for office and what it actually takes to lead. So you've got a large number of people who are very good at the things it takes to get elected to office. Look at our current president as an example of that, who lack almost all the ability to actually be an effective leader once they're elected. And so we see that problem coming up more and more as the reason why a lot of folks can't get further than they got.
Yeah, we talk about that on our show, how you define leadership and how you find people that can become leaders, and I take it that's one of the things you're doing. One of the phrases you coined is political entrepreneur. At least I think you coined it because I didn't hear it anywhere else. So it seems to me like you're combining two thoughts there. Someone that is steeped in politics but has an entrepreneurial bent. Is that what you look for in candidates?
That's certainly one of the things we look for. And to be clear, when we think about people who are, we have a whole series of things that we look for in people to come into our process, and it includes what we call entrepreneurial spirit, which doesn't necessarily mean that you have been an entrepreneur in the sense that most people think of it. You don't have to have founded a tech company or something like that, but there is a nature to entrepreneurs, which is that they're willing to take risks. They're willing to they have an ability to see things that other people don't see, and do something about those problems and things that they see in the world. That kind of entrepreneur's way of looking at the world, which says, here's a problem, let's try and think of a creative solution to solve it. And having practiced that at some point, that kind of entrepreneurial spirit is really, really important. I think it is one of the things that we should be looking for. And frankly, it is one of the things that, whether it's been called that or not, has been present from our founding. All the founding fathers I just described all have that sense of entrepreneurial spirit, taking extreme risks to do what they did, to think out of the box and to think creatively. And there was no rule book or playbook for how to create a government. Sure, they'd read Plato and they'd read Aristotle and they'd read important thinkers, but they had no real sort of easy model to come up with. So being entrepreneurial, particularly at a time like this moment when there are so many big challenges that need outside-the-box thinking, is really, really a critical part of being able to be an effective leader.
Right, now, you've said we a few times, and we means Run for America, I take it. And you just don't have a concept. You've developed an entire organization. Take us back to the time when you had the spark of, I need to create Run for America, and how you got that going and how you got people to buy into the messaging.
Well, one of the things that really became clear to me in the experience I had making this film, and a lot of dialogue I had with people after that, was this idea that the partisan gridlock was, so paralyzing for our democracy and was really turning off people very much from wanting to participate. And at the same time, I had been having an interesting series of conversations with CEOs and people who had been in smart leaders and business leaders of companies old and new. And I'd been really interested in this idea of talent and human capital and the way they talked about the importance of people and human capital. And I was interested that I didn't really hear much about that in politics. I heard a lot about wins, losses, very sort of practical, short-term, transactional thinking, and started to realize that the smartest people I knew, none of them wanted to run for office, and they were peers and people who I saw great potential and promise. I said, wait a minute, something must be wrong if none of these people want to run for office someday. And so we really started thinking about how do we change that, and changing that in and of itself is key to how we change everything else. Because all of the challenges that we face are, at the end of the day, best solved by people. Best solved by people who are willing to take risks, who are willing to put the country and its future ahead of whatever political realities lie in front of them. And we don't have really almost any of those people today at a national level, I would argue, who are truly willing to do whatever it takes to advance what they know is right. And I think that is what, in turn, leads a lot of people to lose faith and lose trust in the system and to ultimately opt out of the system and ceding more and more power and influence to the worst among us. And so that's really where this came from. And we said, look, this is time to do this. And everybody pretty much agreed. And I think what's important is, I don't believe that partisan gridlock is the problem that needs to be fixed. It is a symptom of the problem, which is a lack of courage, a lack of leadership, and those things are manifest mostly in the individuals who are there. And whatever the reasons might be, that they are not standing up and they're not having that. And I think that the two-party system is one of many reasons why that is the case. Those need to be addressed, and that starts with addressing who the people are who are actually going to lead us into the future.
All right, so you decided to found Run for America. When did you create it? When did it start?
We started the organization really back in 2013. We started working towards it. It really became operational towards the very end of 2015.
Okay, so it became an organization on a website. By the way, website, what, runforamerica.org?
Runfor.us.
Run, like as in run for us, runfor.us, okay? Yeah. I should have written that down, I apologize. And it's a really slick website. It starts out with a video, runs about a minute and a half. I think it's terrific. Your graphics are great. So I encourage everybody to go to runfor.us. And when you get there, it says you want to find outstanding people to run for Congress. How did you decide to focus on Congress?
Yeah, so and the information you're looking at there may be a little bit outdated. We actually expanded our mandate to focus on people who are running for Congress and people at sort of all levels of government, partially because after this election, we started to realize that there was a even bigger opportunity for a lot of folks to do things at the most local level, and there was a lot of kind of renewed interest and understanding of the importance of that. So for us, it's about two things. There's a pipeline process. The vast majority of people who are in office come from previously being elected, right? So 60% of people in Washington, their previous occupation is career politician or lawyer. So it's the overwhelming majority. And the pipeline of people at the state and local level, frankly, is not that good. It is not made up of people who are, for the most part, bold, innovative, risk-taking entrepreneurial thinkers. They're people who are, many of them, planning on being politicians for the rest of their lives. And I think that's a very problematic group of people to have running our country. And there's no kind of investment in building that talent pipeline. So that's a big part of what we do. And we realize that ultimately, if you want good people to run for Congress, you have to kind of have your own farm team. Just like if you're in Major League Baseball, at some point you decide, as opposed to poaching people from all the other teams, you should have your own team to grow people up and make sure that you've got good people to pick from and that you can pick from them at a reasonable price. So in our case, we are interested in developing that pipeline and also understanding that while people are at the local level, there's a lot that they can get done. But we spend $80 billion, Stephen, every single year in America in the corporate sector on talent identification, development, retention. I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There are whole companies that are designed to help people, find, retain, identify, recruit great talent in the corporate sector. We do not focus on it at all in politics, and frankly, the system shows. Most people I don't know this, and I think it's important to share this information. There are over 500,000 elected offices in the United States. If you exclude Chinese village elections, the elected offices in the United States represent over 60% of all the elected offices in the world. So to the degree that people think the United States isn't number one in anything. Well, we're number one in the number of things you can be elected to. Yet the level of competition is pathetic. Almost 80% of those elections are regularly uncontested or unopposed. And to the degree that they are opposed, they're not opposed with anyone running with any seriousness. So, it's a very, very big challenge we have, and it's going to take decades to really build up the kind of pipelines that we need to ensure that smart, talented people are filling all these offices.
I'm glad to hear you say that either you or your organization is making a commitment to build this over decades, because I think one of the problems with a lot of people that have new ideas for politics, or even people who want to run for office, is it's only done in 2-year bursts. They don't look long term, and you can't develop this pipeline you're talking about unless you have that kind of a commitment, 10, 12-year horizon. In fact, you've got this millennial focus. I would argue that most of the power of the millennial generation is going to hit, 6, 8, 10 years out from now. So if you're readying them for that timeline, I think that's terrific.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, very good point, and I think the whole system is optimized around very short-term thinking. I mean, everyone is always talking about things in 2-year cycles, and it's funny because I meet people all the time. They say, "Oh, I've got a great plan to change American politics, and it's all gonna happen in the next 2 years." And I say, "Oh, really? That's very exciting." And just like any problem, I mean, this problem, if you really want to look at the roots of this problem, the challenges we're dealing with are about, I would say, at least now, maybe 35, years behind us, maybe 40, in terms of, what we're dealing with. I mean, a lot of this stuff starts with Watergate, starts with, the lack of trust that people have in elected officials. I mean, numbers post-Watergate in terms of people's faith in the democratic institutions. That's when those things really started to take a hit in a meaningful way and have never recovered since. You look at the way that the media landscape changed in the late 80s and early 90s with the sort of boom of 24/7 cable news, all of this stuff. And then on top of the Monica Lewinsky scandal, you just keep looking at this. This is kind of how we've gotten to where we are today. It's not just about partisan gridlock. It's not simply about all that. It's a much broader problem. It's going to take decades to untangle a lot of this stuff and create the kind of leadership that people can look at and believe it. So I think that's really a big part of this problem, that we've got to be looking at this stuff in terms of the long term, and that frankly means not optimizing necessarily our work, which we don't do, for short term wins and losses. We're not obsessing about that kind of stuff. And a lot of people on the landscape, that's all they care about. Politics is about winning, but we are really in the leadership and the talent business, and that is about a much more long-term game. One of the biggest problems, I think, right now in our society is what I call the disease of short-termism, where everything people are looking at is so myopic and so focused on what's going to happen in the next year, what's going to happen in the next 2 years, and totally missing the picture of the real problems and challenges that we need to take, which has to be looked at on a 5, 10, 15, and 20-year horizon.
Yeah, an advantage that I have, being an old guy, is I've seen government work before, and I have this new theory. I'm going to write about it. Maybe you and I'll write something together. That your generation, and you took it back 40 years. Some people just take it back 20. Your entire generation doesn't know government functioning well. Doesn't even know what that looks like. So how do you communicate that to people? Now, I don't want you to run for office. I want you to operate within the context of a world of government you've never seen before.
Well, I think it's a good point, right? And I think it's not just young people who feel that way. It's a lot of people who have seen in the last 20 years really very few positive examples of the media living up to its full potential, the government living up to its full potential, institutions, banks, financial institutions. I mean, we've seen massive institutional failures on all of these things in the last 20 years, and it makes people very wary of these things. And I think in part that's one of the things that's allowed people to put such a halo over what's happening in Silicon Valley, and to look at that as a source of hope and a source of optimism about, people always talking about, well, people in Silicon Valley are going to save us, which I don't happen to think is true, but that's a topic for another show. So, but I think there's a lot of distrust and mistrust of these institutions. I think a lot of people don't feel that the government is trying hard to solve problems, and I think in a lot of ways they would be right. I mean, look, just because there are smart, hardworking people, some of whom have good intentions in government, doesn't mean that their first priority is to figure out how to create the best solutions for Americans. In many cases, their first priority is to figure out how to get reelected and how to keep their party and their office strong. And as long as that's the case, I think it's going to be very hard for the American people to come back around to the idea that, the government and sort of elections and investing this amount of time is a system worth doing.
So we talk about that in the show a lot. I call it incumbency protection. Everything's driven by incumbency protection. So within this great idea, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and just to say one other thing about this, Steve, which I think is really important. One of the things that we focus on a lot is how to really understand, for someone who's thinking about running for office, why is it that you want to do this? And I trace the problem of incumbency protection back to this, which is that most people, certainly at the federal level, who are in office, are there not because there was something that happened to them, some issue, some idea, some community, something that they saw, that they said, this is not right, I want to do something about it, I'm going to run for office, and I'm going to try and fix this, right? In other words, a set of ideas or issues that really motivated them to get into office. That's not the case for most people. For most people, the situation is something like, they've always been interested in politics, it's always been something they thought about, they kind of had the right profile, an opportunity arose, the cards kind of fell in the right way, and they decided, I'm going to go do this, and here they are. And so when your motivation for doing what you're doing arose out of basically, a desire to create an opportunity for yourself, that's going to be your primary motivation going forward. And so you look at that, and it's different than the people, and I think there's a very small number of them who have very clear, consistent values which drive them. Look at someone like Elizabeth Warren, or look at someone like Justin Amash, who's a congressman, on the Republican side. Both of them are people who are driven by very, very clear, very well-defined values and principles and issues and things that they're fighting for. They actually have much more of a chance of being able to buck their own party, to be more bipartisan, because their moral compass is much more clear than people who are basically trying to figure out, well, gee, how do I accumulate as much power as possible? How do I keep my power? How do I continue to grow my power? And usually what you find about those people is that they don't often actually use that power. They don't actually often call those chips in. And they get into a pattern of thinking, well, this is all, so that I can do X or Y someday.
So David, the time always flies on my show, and I always have fun. Got time probably for one last question, then do a little selling. Although you've been doing a little selling throughout the show. You have a concept called Pathways for America, and it's a program for people for how to run for office. Tell a little bit about Pathways, and then close up by telling us how to find your great organization and how to get active.
Yeah, so Pathways is a program that we've launched, which really, to the last one I just made, really helps people figure out why they want to run, what they care about, what they need to know, what they need to understand. Really helps them look inside themselves to understand their role and what they can do inside the civic ecosystem. And it's really a program for people, whether you've never thought about running for office before, or whether you want to run for office at some point in the next future and you don't know what to do next. It's a program for all those folks, and you can learn more about it and all of our work at www.runfor.us if you want to sign up, to be part of our programs, to volunteer, you can donate, you can do all of that at our website. And we'd encourage anybody who's out there listening to come and join us.
Well, thank you for being on the show. I think we'd like to have you back maybe next year, because you'll be heading into 2018. It'll be the election year, and you can tell us a little more about how you found these great candidates and what you're doing to help them get elected for office. So hopefully you'll give me a rain check for next year, too.
Happy to do it.
Thanks, David. All the best.
Thank you, Stephen.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our conversation with David Burstein. As always, our goal on None of the Above is to both educate you and have some fun. We've had a lot of focus on millennials, a ton of energy there, a lot of great ideas. And one of the things about David that I think is exciting is he's very focused on a concept, but he's developing his concept. He's put a lot of time in. He's speaking all around the country. He's bringing in talented people. Always important to bring in talented people. And as you heard him say, he's willing to put in the time. This is not maybe like a 2-year project or a 4-year project. He said maybe it's a 10-year project or a multi-decade project. And I agree with him. It's going to take that kind of time to turn the system around. And he's looking for these political entrepreneurs to help shape the system. So we're going to certainly follow David going forward in his career, and we're going to hopefully get you to take a look at Run for America. Again, the website is run4.us, run4.us. And then you can also take a look at Pathways for America. So 2 great sources. And when you go there, I think you're going to find they're looking for candidates. They're looking for these political entrepreneurs. If you're one of them, you want to contact them and think about running for office. And if you know someone that would just be great at helping fix these problems, get them the name. You know, part of this show is getting you to do something to make a contribution and make the system better. As I said in the beginning, we're starting a new half-hour format today. For those of you that want to catch the old shows, you can always find us on grassrootstv.org. And then we break up our shows into segments on noneoftheabove.tv. So grassrootstv.org and noneoftheabove.tv. We also have our website where we talk about a lot of concepts and deal with issues related to dysfunctions and always talk dysfunction in politics and always talking about solutions. Remember, if you're not one of the solutions, you are part of the problem.